Don Frye is one of the most recognizable figures from the early UFC era. A fighter built on toughness, pressure, and violence. In his prime, he was known for raw power and zero fear. But as Frye moves into his 60s, the story looks very different. Years of punishment, health problems, money issues, and choices that still follow him. This is the cost of being one of MMA's first icons. If you think you know how this story ends, you don't. And if you think this is just another tough guy MMA legend highlight reel, you're wrong. Because by the end of this video, you'll understand how a man who once terrified an entire sport slowly became a ghost inside his own legacy. So stay until the end, because Don Frye's life didn't fall apart in one moment. It cracked quietly, year by year, before the pain, before the surgeries, before the silence. There was Don Frye the myth. Born in 1965 in Arizona, Don Frye didn't grow up dreaming of fame. He grew up in a world where toughness wasn't optional. It was currency. You didn't talk. You endured. You pushed forward. And if your body broke, you pretended it didn't. That mindset followed him everywhere. And later, the cage. Frye was a standout wrestler. Strong, relentless, brutal in the old school way. Just pressure and punishment. Frye didn't just learn how to fight. He learned how to suffer without complaint. That would become both his greatest strength and his slowest poison. When mixed martial arts exploded in the 1990s, the sport didn't have rules the way it does now. It was survival, and Don Frye fit perfectly. Thick mustache, cold stare, no fear. When he entered the UFC, he wasn't marketed as a star. He was marketed as a warning. Fans loved him instantly, not because he talked trash, but because he never backed up, ever. Frye became one of the early UFC champions, winning the Ultimate Tournament and carving out a reputation as the embodiment of violence with honor. He didn't dance. He didn't celebrate. He walked forward and broke people. To the audience, he looked invincible, like a man made of iron. But here's the part nobody tells you. Every fight took something from him. Every war stole a piece he would never get back. The punishment added up. Broken hands, torn ligaments, concussions no one tracked back then. The kind of damage that didn't show on highlight reels. While fans cheered, Don Frye was teaching his body to fail early. Then came Pride Fighting Championships in Japan. Bigger crowds, brighter lights, and one fight that would define him forever. Frye versus Yoshiro Takayama. No defense, just two men standing in the center of the ring, trading punches until one collapsed. It became legendary, iconic, timeless. But that fight wasn't a victory. It was a warning, because from that moment on, Don Frye stopped being just a fighter. He became a symbol of how much damage a man can take. Before the world moves on, stay with me, because here's where the story turns darker. Because this is the moment where Don Frye became immortal to fans and disposable to the system. This part matters more than you think. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, Don Frye wasn't just fighting. He was sacrificing himself for sport. MMA back then didn't care about longevity. There were no concussion protocols, no long-term health studies, no retirement plans. Fighters were expected to be tough, silent, and replaceable. And Don Frye embodied that culture better than anyone. If there was a dangerous opponent, he took the fight. If the rules were vague, he didn't ask questions. If his body hurt, he hit it. Fans mistook this for strength. Behind the scenes, it was erosion. Fight after fight, Frye absorbed punishment that would end careers today. The pride of being the toughest guy in a room became a trap. Saying no felt like weakness, and weakness wasn't allowed. Then came Japan. Pride Fighting Championships treated Frye like royalty. Massive crowds, deafening cheers. He was a foreign warrior, a symbol of American grit. And Frye delivered exactly what they wanted. Violence, courage, blood. The Takayama fight wasn't an accident. It was a product of the era. Two men agreeing, silently, to stand still and shorten their own lives for entertainment. No defense, just fists. The crowd went insane. Commentators called it legendary. Fans replayed it for decades. But here's the truth no highlight reel will tell you. That fight shaved years off his life. Repeated head trauma doesn't always show up immediately. It waits. It compounds. It rewires. Frye kept fighting, but something subtle changed. Slower reactions, longer recovery times, lingering pain that never left. Still, he pushed on, because stopping meant facing what the damage had already done. Losses began to stack up. Not humiliating losses, just attrition. The kind where a man doesn't look beaten, just tired. Pride kept calling. Smaller promotions kept offering fights. Frye kept saying yes, because fighting was all he knew, and walking away felt scarier than another war. Outside the ring, life wasn't getting easier. The fame didn't translate into financial security. There were no massive paydays waiting for pioneers. Medical bills replaced applause. Injuries followed him home, and the silence between fights grew heavier. Eventually, the body forced the decision the mind couldn't make. Don Frye stepped away from MMA not with a farewell tour, but with a whimper. No victory lap, just a battered legend quietly exiting while the sport surged forward without him. The world moved on, and Don Frye was left alone with the damage. In the next chapter, we'll talk about what happens after the cheering stops. Because for Don Frye, the real fight didn't happen in the cage. It happened when the lights went out. This is where the story stops being about fighting and starts being about survival. Stick with me because this doesn't end well. Because once Don Frye left the cage, the damage didn't stay behind. It followed him home. Retirement didn't bring relief. It brought depression. For years, Frye had lived inside noise. Crowds, corners yelling, gloves slapping, adrenaline masking pain. When that disappeared, what was left was his body. And his body was failing him in ways no one warned him about. The injuries weren't dramatic anymore. They were constant. Chronic pain became his baseline. His hands ached. His knees barely cooperated. His back felt like it was held together by memory alone. And worst of all, the headaches. Crushing, relentless. The kind that made concentration feel impossible. The kind that made sleep a negotiation instead of a guarantee. This is the part fans never see. Because warriors aren't supposed to complain. So Frye didn't. Instead, he did what many fighters from his era were forced to do. He adapted. He looked for ways to stay relevant. He tried acting, movies, TV roles, westerns, tough guy characters that mirrored the image people still expected from him. On screen, he looked strong, unbreakable. Off screen, he was deteriorating. The money from acting helped, but it wasn't stability. It wasn't healthcare. It didn't undo decades of trauma. And as the roles slowed, the reality became harder to ignore. The sport he helped build had moved on to younger, faster, safer fighters. Rules improved. Pay improved. Medical awareness improved. Too late for him. Frye had become a relic of a brutal era that no longer wanted to look itself in the mirror. Then came a diagnosis. Heart issues and organ complications. Long-term damage that didn't come from one fight, but from all of them. Years of punishment stacked on top of each other. Doctors told him what no promoter ever did. His body had limits, and they'd been crossed a long time ago. Hospital visits became routine. Surgeries followed. Recovery never felt complete. And slowly, quietly, Don Frye's public appearances became rarer. Interviews slowed. Social media speculation grew. Fans asked where he went. The truth was uncomfortable. He was fighting battles no one was filming. At one point, Frye opened up about needing serious medical care, about facing the possibility that his fighting years had cost him decades of life. And when fans heard this, the reaction was jarring. Shock, sympathy, guilt, because suddenly, the man who gave them unforgettable moments was paying the price alone. This is the curse of pioneer fighters. They build the foundation, then get buried under it. Don Frye never asked for pity. He never begged the UFC or Pride for help. That wasn't his style. Fighters from his era didn't do that. But the silence around him spoke louder than any complaint ever could. The system that cheered his violence had no plan for his survival. And in the next chapter, we're going to talk about the part that hurts the most. The moment the world realized Don Frye wasn't invincible after all, and asked the question no one wanted to answer. If you've made it this far, you already know this isn't a comeback story. This is the part where reality hits harder than any punch Don Frye ever took. So don't click away yet, because this is where the myth finally starts to collapse. By the mid-2010s, Don Frye's body was no longer just hurting. It was failing. The tough guy's silence couldn't hide it anymore. Hospital beds replaced gym mats. Medical monitors replaced cheering crowds. The man once known for standing toe-to-toe in wars now struggled with basic health. Heart complications, internal issues, long-term damage doctors could trace back to years of punishment and stress. This wasn't bad luck. This was accumulation. Every fight had written a check his body could no longer cash. At one point, Frye was hospitalized in serious condition. The news spread quietly at first. Realizing something was deeply wrong, photos surfaced. Frye older, thinner, hooked up to machines. Still smiling, but it was different now. Forced, tired. That image shocked people more than any knockout ever had. Because legends aren't supposed to look fragile. Don Frye had spent his entire career convincing the world he was indestructible. And now, here he was fighting for his health while the sport he helped build generated billions without him. New stars, new champions, new eras. The machine kept moving forward. He stayed behind. The cruel irony? The very things that made Frye famous, the wars, the damage, the refusal to quit, were the same things putting him in that hospital bed. Fans replayed the Takayama fight again, but this time it felt different. Less heroic, more haunting. Two men shortening their lives while the crowd roared. Suddenly, it didn't look brave. It looked tragic. Frye himself never blamed anyone. That's what made it worse. No public bitterness. No angry interviews calling out promotions. He accepted it the way he'd accepted punches his whole life, quietly, stoically, almost stubbornly. But acceptance doesn't heal organs. The reality was brutal. The pioneers of MMA weren't protected. They weren't paid enough to retire comfortably. They weren't studied, monitored, or supported. They were used. And when their bodies broke, they were remembered fondly from a distance. Don Frye became a warning wrapped in nostalgia. Fans started asking uncomfortable questions. Who takes care of fighters after the spotlight fades? Who pays the medical bills when the wars are over? Why do we celebrate damage while it's happening, then look away when it shows up years later? Frye never asked those questions out loud, but his condition answered them anyway. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about legacy. Not the highlight reel version, the real one, and whether Don Frye's sacrifices were honored or simply forgotten. This is the chapter that should make you uncomfortable, because this isn't about Don Frye anymore. It's about us, and what happens to men after we finish using them. By the time Don Frye's health struggles became public, the MMA world had already moved on. The sport was cleaner now, safer, more regulated. Fighters talked about brain health, recovery, longevity. The UFC was a global empire. Pay-per-views shattered records. New champions became millionaires. And the pioneers? They were footnotes. Don Frye's name still popped up in legend conversations. His fights were shared as throwbacks. They don't make them like this anymore, fans would say, replaying brutal clips like trophies. But very few stop to ask why they don't make them like that anymore. The answer was standing in hospital rooms, attached to machines, paying the price in silence. This is the cruel paradox of combat sports. The men who made it popular suffered the most. The men who arrived later benefited from their suffering. Frye wasn't destitute, but he wasn't secure either. Acting roles slowed. Appearances became limited. Medical care was expensive. And the truth no one likes to admit is this: nostalgia doesn't pay hospital bills. Applause doesn't reverse organ damage. Respect doesn't extend your lifespan. When fans finally realized how serious Frye's condition was, the reaction was emotional. Messages poured in. Fighters from newer generations called him a hero, a warrior, an inspiration. And while those words were sincere, they rang hollow against the backdrop of reality. Because inspiration didn't protect him when he needed it most. The UFC didn't build its modern safety standards out of kindness. They were built out of necessity, after men like Don Frye had already absorbed the consequences. And while the company honored legends ceremonially, there was no real system to ensure their long-term survival. Don Frye represented a generation that gave everything without knowing the cost. A generation told that toughness was silence, that quitting was failure, that pain was the price of greatness. And when their bodies finally collapsed, the world said thank you and kept moving. That's the part that hurts. Because Frye never chased fame. He never chased money. He chased honor. He fought because that's what he believed men were supposed to do. And in return, the sport took his best years, his health, and eventually, his future. Legacy is a strange thing. To fans, Don Frye is immortal. To his body, he was overworked. To the system, he was replaceable. And that's the tragedy no highlight reel can hide. In the final chapter, we're going to confront the hardest question of all. Was it worth it? And how history will really remember Don Frye when the nostalgia fades and only the consequences remain. If you're still here, this is the ending no one likes. Because it doesn't come with a belt, or a roar, or closure. It comes with a question. Was it worth it? When people talk about Don Frye today, they talk about the mustache, the stare, the wars. They talk about a version of him frozen in time. Strong, fearless, indestructible. That version is easy to celebrate. That version doesn't ask anything back. But the real Don Frye kept aging, kept hurting, kept paying, long after the crowds stopped chanting his name. This is the part of legacy combat sports rarely confront honestly. The cost doesn't end when the referee pulls two men apart. It lingers in hospital rooms, in prescription bottles, in bodies that never fully recover. Frye didn't just give blood to the sport. He gave years, decades, pieces of himself that never grew back. And the hardest truth? If Don Frye came up in today's MMA world, he would have been protected from becoming Don Frye. Doctors would have stopped some fights. Commissions would have suspended him. Analysts would have called his style reckless. Fans would have begged him to evolve. The same traits that made him legendary would have been labeled dangerous. Progress saved the next generation, but it abandoned the last one. Don Frye didn't retire rich. He didn't retire healthy. He didn't retire celebrated in the way modern champions are. He retired worn down. And yet, even now, there's no bitterness in how people describe him. That might be the most tragic part of all. He never demanded accountability, never accused the sport of taking too much. He lived by a code that didn't allow regret, even when regret might have been justified. So how will history remember Don Frye? As a hero, as a warrior, as a relic of a brutal era. But maybe the more honest answer is this. He'll be remembered as proof. Proof of what it costs to build MMA. Proof that toughness without protection leads to quiet suffering. Proof that legends don't fade, they fracture. The sport owes its safety to men like Don Frye, its popularity, its legitimacy. But safety came too late for him. And that's why this story matters. Because the next time you watch an old school war and feel that rush, the blood, the grit, the nostalgia, remember what came after. Remember the hospital beds, the silence, the men who paid so others wouldn't have to. Don Frye didn't lose his final fight in the cage. He lost it to time, to damage, to a system that didn't know how to stop him. And in the end, that might be the most depressing truth of all. The toughest men don't always get the happiest endings.